Uh, okay, we're good to go. All right, I've got the timer on. Well, Max, thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning. Well, I mean, it's good morning here in Spain, so I should be saying good afternoon in Japan. Here it's good morning in Spain. It's been a very early morning this morning. My name is Jim. A little bit about me before we begin. I'm a teacher and teacher trainer for Cambridge University Press and Cambridge Assessment here in Spain. I am also the author of the blog SpongeJALT. Some of you may have come across it in your journeys on the internet. And something, I don't know, personal. I love pizza, but I also love sport. They sometimes they work. I love them both. So let's get into today's session. The title of today's session is the importance of exam moderation workshops. Before I suppose I continue, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to the Okinawa chapter of JALT. It was really, really amazing to be invited to speak. So it's a massive thank you. And it's been really worthwhile so far. The sessions that have been covered this morning have been really informative. Now, we're going to look at workshop success criteria. And normally this is where, you know, presenters, we talk about what we want to get out of the workshop, but I'd rather focus on you. Now, this is a workshop, and I stress a workshop, which means participation. We have a very small group. It'd be lovely to see all your faces. I can see I've got the cameras off. If you feel comfortable turning on your cameras, great. If not, don't worry. So our workshop success criteria, I'd like you in the chat. Okay, so I think we only have 3 people so far. What would you like to get out of this workshop? Bearing in mind that the title is exam moderation workshops, what's your success criteria? What's one thing that you would like to get out of it? Okay, so in the chat, if you could write one thing, anything that comes to your mind about what you would like to get out of this workshop. Okay, so give everyone about 30 seconds. Good morning, Tatsuya. Welcome. We're just looking at our own success criteria before moving through the workshop. The workshop is titled Exam Moderation Workshops, or the importance. And I'd love to know what you would like to get out of the workshop. What's your success criteria for this workshop? Feel free to write it in the chat. So thank you very much, Max, for that. How to better ensure consistent standards. Excellent. Okay. Right. Hopefully I touch on that success criteria. What do you think is important when teaching exam? Brilliant. Great. Tetsuya and Son, if you would like to write yours as well, feel free to. I'll continue, but please feel free to write your success criteria down. Now, hopefully I can touch on your success criteria today. My success criteria for the workshop is quite varied, if you will. So the first is to explore our own beliefs and experience working with exam criteria, because I think that's an important starting point. And then I'd like to cover 5 workshops that can be used in in-service training programs to develop teachers' assessment literacy. Oh, I have an orthographical error there. Please ignore that. Teacher assessment literacy and confidence with using assessment criteria. Now, this is interaction based. You need to interact. Okay. Now we have actually quite a small group. So if you feel like opening your mics, you're more than welcome to. Please, you will need to use your phones, or alternatively, I'll put in the chats. There is a link to Poll Everywhere. Okay. We're going to be using this in the first part of today's session. Okay. Now we have quite a small group, so there shouldn't be any issues, I think. If you scan the QR code with your phone, it should pop up something like almost like a black screen, and there'll be some questions that come up as we go along. If you have any troubles, you can click the link in the chat. Okay, so our experiences, let's look at our own beliefs and our own experiences as teacher examiners. So our first question is, how confident do you feel with using exam criteria for criterion referenced exams in your teaching context? So by criterion reference, we mean things like IELTS, where it's not norm reference. It's not based on who's in the class. It's the same for everyone. How confident do you feel? So I'll give everyone about 30 more seconds to fill that out. Okay, so we got, yeah. I've sent in my answer as well to give some more. Okay. All right, interesting. We got about 50-50. Yeah, that's pretty normal. C, okay, yeah. Hi, Maha. I'm going to send the link to you. Let me just copy that link. You should be able to access the link. We've only got 2 more questions, okay? Right, so let's move on to our next one. Now we'll have about 2 minutes for this one, a bit longer. What training have you received? Now, I think I need to activate this, so 1 second. Activate. It should be activated now. Now, so what training have you received regarding the implementation and use of the criteria? And do you feel that this training was sufficient? So in terms of if it's for IELTS or one of the other local examinations that you have in Japan, have you received workshops? Have you gone to training days? Have you carried out mock examinations? This sort of training. And do you think that that sufficiently prepared you to be a teacher examiner? So I have about 40 seconds left. Okay, university employer-wide training, great. National training, it's insufficient. Okay, participation about TOEFL and IELTS. Okay. Not enough. Okay, interesting. Right, so we've all identified that there is some training available. Perhaps it's in general not sufficient. So let's take a look at the next question. And this is perhaps something that's maybe the most important thing that we need to focus on. For you, what makes working with exam criteria and tasks difficult? So if you have exam criteria that you need to use to assess learners, what makes it that difficult? What are some of the difficult things of working with that? Or, for example, exam tasks themselves. So we'll go for about a minute for this one. Brilliant. Yeah, I just sent one for me. I said interpretation. We've got so interpreting rubrics as well. It's quite difficult. Yeah. Didn't choose the material. Great. Okay, plenty of responses. Questions themselves, administration that demands grading. Okay, yeah. Right, so all of these are really, really valid points. Hopefully today we can touch on most of these. Now, there's no silver bullet, if you will, to encounter or to fight against all of these problems. However, one solution I'm going to offer you today is exam moderation workshops. And hopefully they present a solution that can be used in a variety of different contexts, okay? So my context is here in Spain. Your context is obviously in Japan or in Tunisia. I'm not sure if that's where you are. So the idea is to have a generalized sort of thing that can be used everywhere. Now, let's look at what exam moderation is. And in the traditional sense, exam moderation is when, teachers come together, they assess a piece of work, and they discuss it through the eyes of a set of criteria. And the reason that we do this is kind of threefold. We look at the idea of standardization, inter-rater reliability, so that I'm marking the same as you, and we allow for discussion. Now, there are different types of moderation, but the moderation that I'm advocating today is consensus moderation. And this is very similar to what I said before, but so we start with the individual assessment of work. We look at a group analysis, not only of the piece of work, but of the method of assessment and how that's done. And then we integrate reflection in this. And this is taking a more of a socio-cultural approach to exam moderation, in which we co-construct meaning together. Okay, so we look at the criteria and we interpret the criteria together as a group, and we come to a local understanding. So we might be thinking, do we actually need this? Do we need exam moderation workshops? Do we need more training? Do we need time to discuss criteria? Well, let's look at some research. So this is from Fester in 2021, from an article she did in the Modern English Teacher. And she looked at professional concerns for teachers in assessment practices was quite high. Another area that she looked at is that teachers or new teachers found challenging. And again, assessment focused sessions were quite high. Now, this was taken in New Zealand, but let's take a look at a more international sort of research, if you will, scope. And this is from the IELTS examiner voices. So examiners were all asked, IELTS examiners were asked for their opinion on if their training was sufficient. And it was really interesting that they came out, this is from 2021, quite recent research, that even trained examiners for the IELTS are saying that they need more training time. They need more opportunities to interact with this criteria in mock assessments and so forth. So this to me says that yes, we do need to provide these opportunities to interact with this criteria. But what do teachers actually need? Now I'm going to use the term effective teacher examiner, because not all teachers are examiners. And I suppose not all examiners are always teachers at that time. So we're going to combine both of them. And there, I'm drawing on the research from Cloud and Wyatt Smith in 2013. And there are three knowledge areas that we really need to develop in order to be effective teacher examiners. So one, knowledge of the content to be assessed, that is the exam itself. What do learners or participants actually need to do? Two, knowledge of the criteria. What is the criteria and how do each of the criterion differ? And of course, we have three, the experience in assessment. So this is where we get to this idea of, is it theory then practice, or is it practice then theory? Well, I think it's a mixture of both, really. But that experience in assessment is vital in being able to understand the criteria for the context in which it's used. So let's get into the workshop ideas. If I'm going too fast for everyone, please send me a message or a question. You're more than welcome to interrupt, yeah? We have quite a small group, so go for it. So we're going to take a look at knowledge of content first. And I have a question for everyone. How many of us here have actually taken the exams that our learners are doing? So we only have 5 of us, so maybe we can, or 6 of us. How many of us here have actually, in the chat, feel free to say yes or no. How many of us here have actually completed the exams that we're asking our learners to take? So in my own personal experience, I prepare learners for a range of Cambridge assessment main suite exams, and they're quite common here in Spain. Some of them I've taken with my learners, so I do them when they're doing them. But for example, the C2 proficiency of English, I prepared learners for this for many years, but I've never taken the exam myself. Okay, brilliant, excellent. And so I imagine you've taken this, so you've taken a number of the exams that that you've gone through and that you've taught. I've only spoken about the IELTS. Good. Now, I'm not saying in the sense of taking them and paid the examination fee. No, I'm saying that in your local context, doing a mock exam, of course. But this is something that we can do with teachers in a workshop. So we look at the idea of looking at teachers as learners. And where do we start from this? We take an exam and we do an analysis of the exam, and we actually raise teachers' awareness of what they actually need to do. Hi, Jerry. Thank you. First, I wasn't correct. Right. Okay. Right. So we have analysis of the exam. Then what's the next important part is we get teachers to actually complete the exam under the same conditions as learners. Now, you might argue that these are, the normal things, and that's fine. Some teachers maybe do this, but I would argue that the important part is the next part, reflection on experience. And this is where we get to really understand what our learners are going through. So we have certain questions here like, why did you complete that task the way you did? How do you think learners would feel doing that task? Now, you have to remember that we're quite proficient users of English, and our learners are developing their level of English. So we need to think about, if I'm able to do this way, then maybe I need to take that in consideration when I'm preparing my learners for that exam. And that eventually leads us to the question, how can we best prepare our learners for that exam? So this has a number of benefits. And we start with actually the exam itself. By completing the exam, we actually have a much better opinion of what the exam entails. And that allows us to go into a much more informed discussion in the reflection stage. Now, this in turn, apart from the understanding the exam factor, it leads us into developing empathy for our learners. And Andy touched on this morning. But empathy has been shown time and time again to be almost a base for success in language classrooms. So if we can create conditions in which empathy can strive, can work, all the better, right? And so this is one way in which we as teachers can really start to empathize with our learners. Building on this, our second workshop idea for today, and I'm going to get you to do something in a second, is teachers as exam item writers. Now, I'm not saying for us to write exams, of course not. What I am saying is that we can actually give teachers more insights into the exam tasks themselves by getting them to create exam tasks from exam tasks. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say you have a reading exam task where you have a reading and a multiple choice question. Reading multiple choice comprehension questions, a fairly standard exam task. What we can do is we can give teachers the text, the specifications for the exam task, the rubric, but we take away those multiple choice questions. And we say, it's your job now to create the exam task. Teachers work together, they create this exam task following the specifications in the rubric, and then they compare with the actual task and reflect on the experience. Okay. Now, reflection, you can see, is quite a common element in all of these workshops so far. And this is really, really important. So certain things that come up after this is, what points are you going to take from this and give to your learners? But let's actually do something ourselves. Now, this is from the IELTS exam. We have a task in which we need to, there are texts. So for example, there's a text and you have paragraphs, and learners need to match headings, the summary, if you will, the main idea of that paragraph with the headings. So here I have two paragraphs. We're gonna have about 2 to 3 minutes now. I'd like you to read paragraph A and think of a suitable heading for paragraph A. And the same for paragraph B. Write them down for me. If you want to write them down on a piece of paper, great. If you want to write them in the chat, excellent. What could be a heading, a subheading for paragraph A, and what could be a heading or a subheading for paragraph B? So there's about 2 minutes, and we'll come back and see what you've got. Okay, about 1 minute. If you haven't written them down in the chat, that's completely fine. You can write them down on a piece of paper. I'd like you also to think about the processes that you're going through You can write them down, Max, if fine, write them in if you'd like to put a suggestion in. Like you'd also think about the processes that you're going through right now. So you're going to create a summary or the main idea, newspaper production, newspaper print. Excellent. Okay, so let's take a look at the headings that were given. Okay, so this is from the exam task, the evolution newspaper, right? Brilliant. Okay. All right. Newspaper printed. Great. So this is actually the exam task taken from the IELTS reading. And the two headings that were given were split location for newspaper production and getting the newspapers to the printing center. Okay, so we've all touched on them kind of there, right? Now, this looking at the answers is one part of the workshop, but the important part is going through those processes. What processes did you go through then to identify the main ideas of those paragraphs? So you were reading, you were summarizing as you were reading. Okay, so all of these advanced reading skills are things that we need to develop in our learners. And so by building an understanding of how they're doing that in the exam helps us lead into the preparation in the classroom that we can provide. So we've looked at knowledge of content, but what about knowledge of criteria? Teacher-ised criteria is one thing that I would recommend all teachers do. It's taking the criteria as it is, which may or may not be usable. Okay, so I've seen some criteria that are very, I don't even know what that says, and some criteria where you're like, okay, I can understand it, but it's a little bit vague, right? Now, questions that I usually hear from teachers, I train teachers on the Cambridge exams, and I work with teachers in development programs. These are some of the questions that I get all the time, and it's not only for Cambridge exams, it's for IELTS, it's for TOEFL, and I imagine in your local context for other exams that you have there must be similar questions that come up. And these are all really, really good questions, but you can't answer them by looking at the criteria most of the time. And I would argue you can't answer them by yourself most of the time. So one thing that we can do is we can get teachers together to look at a set of criteria or a criterion, and get them to create their own checklist. Okay, so to a bit of context here for the Cambridge B2 first, a band 3 for language is considered B2, right? And so we have some expressions here. Uses a range of everyday vocabulary appropriately with occasional inappropriate use of less common lexis. Right, that's a mouthful. Okay, and you can't really take that away to when you're assessing a piece of writing, right? So what is something that we could put in our checklist? You know, what is something that we could take away? Are there any points here? Now we're gonna have a bit of time. We'll say about a minute or so. Can you think of any suggestions that you could put in a checklist for a band 3, a B2 parse for language? Something that teachers can take away from the workshop and use and tick. Now we have only a few people here. We don't have a lot of time. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts. You don't have to write them. You can say them aloud if you like. Okay, getting the main idea, right? Yeah. So they need that main idea. Okay. Now, remember, we're focusing specifically on language. So like, for example, grammar and vocabulary and discursive features, if you will. Okay, it's difficult to think of by yourself. I know, and I apologize for the fact that we're in an online dynamic where we can't really discuss this openly. So something that I've come up with teachers in my context is the following. So we use a vocabulary that's relevant to the topic. Okay, so if it's the report talking about weather, I'm going to expect them to use weather vocabulary. If learner attempts to use more complex language, okay, so we're looking at perhaps reduced relative clauses, conditionals. Okay, thank you, Max. 5 minutes. Whew, okay. And we can look at, may have small local errors, but if there is an error that makes it incomprehensible, then it can't get above a band 3. Now, this is a checklist that can be taken away. But, and I need to see, yeah, but I would argue that it's not the checklist that's the important thing. The checklist is useful, yes, but what is important is the discussion that is involved in getting to the answers for the checklist, something which we haven't actually been able to do today. So when we sit down, teachers, when I do this with teachers, we sit down and we look at the criteria, and those questions that you saw before come up, and this is where we really get to look at people's interpretation, opinions, thoughts, underlying beliefs, okay, and they really get to discuss this. So building on this, we have the creation of model answers. Now, a model answer is a perfect answer for a speaking activity or a written activity. And as usual, we start with an analysis of the task, and teachers then respond to this task as learners, okay? And then what we do is we build in a peer analysis and a reflection on this experience. So teachers cross-mark each other's writings, and we look at why it's a perfect answer. Now, this can then be taken down to the reflection, which is like, the way we're writing, what do we need to take in and present to our learners? Now, something that I did a number of years ago is we looked at this task, and this is from a C1 Advanced, a Cambridge C1 Advanced textbook that we were using in our academy. And teachers, we came together and we wrote our own example to this. And from here, we analyzed each other's and we looked at things that came up. Then we were able to create a write-up. By write-up, I mean something that we could give to learners that highlights why this is the perfect answer. Now, the reaction from our learners was, wow, this was great, because this is what we need to look for. We see that this is an example of the task that we're doing, okay? And it gives us something to compare to. Now, of course, we're not saying that the teacher's answer is always the best answer in that sense, but we can start to provide support for our learners by going through some of the tasks with them. And this is a great way that we could also build into looking at the features that are necessary for different exam tasks. So experience in assessment, I'm sorry, I'm flying through this. Experience in assessment is really, really important. Now, I'm sure all of us here, I know I certainly do, we have past papers, past writing papers, past speaking audios sitting around somewhere. Why not reuse them? That's my question. If we go back and we reassess past papers, and the process of this is threefold here. So we start by taking an old writing task, for example, from an exam, and we get teachers to come in with the same ones that they have, or they have the same task, and we mark it again, and you cross-mark that with teachers. And what this looks at is we look at developing inter-rater reliability. So it's the same between people, but we also start to look at intra-rater reliability. So before it was you and me are marking the same. Now it's me and me, we're marking the same. And this is a really, really important thing in terms of looking at teacher awareness of their own beliefs and their own practices with exam assessment. And of course, reliability. And this leads into developing a local standard. So obviously we have global exams here, but the important part is within our local context, we're able to have a local understanding of what's expected. It's impossible for the whole world, for IELTS, to have the same understanding of the criteria. The way that we can compensate for that, though, is to look at our local context and see that we're all on the same level. Now, this is from my diary. I wrote this in 2020. I'm not expecting all teachers to do something similar, but this is some of the comments that I wrote about my reflection on seeing what I marked in the past and how I marked then. I'll read this out for us. I've noticed that I've become more lenient with language errors as my knowledge of language teaching pedagogy and acquisition theories increases. I seem to allow minor errors that don't impede communication, as opposed to previously when I would mark them down simply because they were language errors. It's interesting to see how my beliefs and experiences as a teacher shape my interpretation of the criteria used in assessment. So this is my own reflection of how I've changed as a teacher examiner. Now, implementing ideas, some general guidelines. And I know, Max, I'm speeding through. I've got about 1 minute. I have about 2 or 3 slides left. So things that we need to consider. We need to support teachers in exam administration. Okay. So that's providing rubrics, cross-mark exams when we can. And we also need to provide space for discussion, such as these workshops, okay? The important part here is also to ensure that reflection is inbuilt, not only from the workshops, but also after exam periods. So if we're having an exam period where we're running a mock exam, for example, on IELTS, then I would expect our teachers to complete a sort of reflective task. How did you find working with the exam criteria? Do you find that you were more lenient on certain things, certain learners? Okay, and so these are the important things in terms of raising teachers' awareness of their own sort of marking behaviors. Now, our own reflection, I'm very big on reflection, as you should have mentioned. I have 4 things I'd like us to consider very, very quickly, because I know that we need to run off. And we're going to look at the briefcase. What can you take away from today's session and implement in your context? The freezer, what could you take away from today and use at a later date? Okay. The rubbish bin, if something's in the rubbish bin from today's session, that's fine, but I want you to tell me why. Okay. And the last one, did we meet all of our success criteria? So the success criteria that we defined at the start. Now, we only have, there's 6 of us in total. So it'd be great if you could turn your microphones on and let me know your thoughts. Maybe we could go one from every person or everyone that would like to contribute. Jerry, I see you've got your microphone off.
The one thing I just did, I like briefcase, freezer, and rubbish bin. That's great. I do some of this stuff in class. What did you learn today? And you know, things like that. What do you think did work and didn't work? I'm going to change the names from what did you learn to what can you put in the briefcase, what can you freeze, and what can you throw away?
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you.
No problems. If you take something away from the session, that's great.
Well, this is one thing I took away, and I enjoyed that part. I just, hey, this is good stuff. So
excellent. Thank you, Jerry. Max, did you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I really like what you mentioned about using previous papers for both the inter-rater and the intra-rater reliability. I think that's great to ensure that our own marking is consistent for ourselves across time, of course, but also it's a good, easy way of ensuring that we are consistent with other instructors who may be teaching different sections of the same course. It's just the only negative there with using previous papers is that sometimes administratively, when we do parity, we call it parity or moderation at our university. We have to use contemporary papers from the current semester. But I still think that just looking back and reflecting on previous students' papers is great for that intra for ourselves, that reliability across time. So I thought that was very useful.
Brilliant, excellent. Would anyone else like to contribute? Great. Okay, brilliant. Well, certainly, you know, reflection is, as you would see, it's a very, very important element in all of these workshops, as well as any sort of training that we do. So taking away anything that we do from here, I hope we all reflect on something. I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of you that came to my workshop this morning. If you would like to get in touch, you can get in touch with me by jim@spongelt.org, or you can contact me via the blog, spongelt.org as well. If you'd like some of the references or the sources from today's workshop, they are here as well. And I'm more than happy to pass on the slides or the content to anyone that would like it as well, okay? And that's all. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you guys very much for coming to this session. I'm going to stop the recording now in case you were waiting to say something secret, I guess.